Okay, second time lucky. We'll reconvene the meeting. Welcome everyone back. I hope all our councillors online kept abreast of things. The immediate crisis, whatever it may have been, seems to have been resolved. Sorry about that interruption, Nicole. So we'll just go back to you, just pick it up from wherever you think appropriate. Probably don't have to go back to the start, but we'll just leave it to you to proceed in the manner you think suitable, and continue with the presentation. Let's hope we get through it this time. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we're quite versed now in crisis management, so it was good to see that there was not another event in Auckland requiring you to manage that. So nice to have the committee back. So just on this slide is really just about the complexity of trade-offs we have. And I was talking about the size and scale of the climate challenge. We also are near the bottom of the OECD in our safety performance as a nation and have a lot of work to do. And at the same time, as we're all aware, our communities are looking for transport choice. We're all focused on access and connectivity, growth, and also equity aspects of the changes that will happen with climate and other things. So we're in a situation of many outcomes we're wanting to achieve with limited funding to achieve those outcomes, which really means we're in a situation of very significant trade-off choices. To sort of help navigate those choices, Waka Kotahi a few years ago started work on Arataki, which is initially a 10-year document looking at a view of New Zealand and each of the regions in New Zealand and how we saw growth occurring and what would happen to those networks as a result of that growth. That information that's informed that for for Auckland is the information coming out of our Joint Intelligence Centre. It's also been informed by broader inputs like Infocom and other groups that have been looking at intelligence, Stats New Zealand, etc., on what likely future population trends are in New Zealand. It is on a 30-year horizon. It incorporates known agreed programs of work, which for Tamaki Makaurau, ATAP, which is the Auckland Transport Action Plan, Future Connect, and your Regional Land Transport Plan, which you agree your prioritised work program for. And it also includes the 3-year National Land Transport View. Future Connect is a 10-year system planning tool for Auckland, which integrates all of the transport systems. So one of the significant changes that happened in the National Land Transport Framework, and actually which Waka Kotahi and AT and others have been working on over the last 3 years, is the integration of all integrated views of all transport networks, how we're working together across all systems in New Zealand, including in Auckland. And so Future Connect is the start of us showing those fully integrated networks for the region. So it sets out strategic networks. I'm going to show you a little bit of that later for each transport mode. Outlines the deficiencies, the opportunities, and identifies focus areas for further investigation. And it's been developed by ourselves, AT, Auckland Council, Mana Whenua, MOT, Kiwi Rail, Kaingaora, and other major stakeholders, Freight Reference Group, the Road Safety Governance Group, Bike Auckland, Automobile Association and Living Aotearoa have all contributed to the development of those documents. If you go to the next slide, what you have, and there was a bit of a comment when someone left the room, I think, to say the policy and planning framework might be a challenge. What we have is quite a lot of planning and policy documents in New Zealand, and this diagram just shows it. So the transport investment frameworks are complex, and there is multiple documents that are inputting into those frameworks at the moment. You'll be aware, if we move on to the next slide, that we are working on a joined up view across Central and Tamaki Makaurau of an Auckland transport plan, and that is really about bringing that work, which already exists, actually in many cases is quite done at quite a level of detail, together in a single document that has an integrated view of future transport networks and options within that for the Auckland region. So that's work that's undergoing at the moment, and I know is a key priority for the Auckland Mayor and our Minister to line up on that. But I'll just reiterate, actually there's been an enormous amount of work done in the 3 years, and I'll come back to that shortly, on transport networks, the integration of those transport networks in Auckland, and the plan around how you might bring this together. Within that context, if you just keep moving, next slide, one of our biggest challenges for all of us is funding. And whilst there has been a record 7.3 billion forecast investment into Auckland and the National Land Transport Program for this 3-year period, you'll see your line there, it's the highest one. You may not be able to see the slide properly, but the right-hand index is how much of what you requested in the 21 to 24 National Land Transport Program was given to your region. And it shows that Auckland got 97% of what it asked for. On the right-hand side is all the other regions, and they got down to about 60% of what they asked for in this regional land transport plan. You got 97%, and then the substantial difference in that was funded, has been funded directly by government through top-ups of the Eastern Busway and cycling projects through other funds. So relative to other regions in New Zealand, Auckland has had a significant share of the National Land Transport Fund, and in the next 3 to 10 year period is getting somewhere in the order to 40 to 50% of the planned investment in transport networks in New Zealand. So the number is over the next 10 years is around $37 billion. 16.3 billion of that will come from the Land Transport Fund. So as you can see from those numbers, the balance is being directly funded by government. It's really just to say there has been quite a significant investment in Auckland and the Auckland region from the funds that are available over this 3-year period, and a real prioritisation towards the Auckland ATAP and other big projects in the Auckland region. Underpinning that, if you move to the next slide, has been a series of integrated strategies that we've been working on, looking at what are the future networks for Auckland. So these are just 3 diagrams that show the roading network for Auckland, the heavy rail and rapid transit. There's much more detailed plans sitting behind these, and cycling and mobility networks. And these have all fed in to those planning documents we've just talked about, particularly ATAP for the 10-year view, but certainly the broader perspectives being put into large transport investments for the region. And they're the basis on which we've been working together across transport modes to look at how we plan networks, but also to prioritise investment in these networks. Part of what has been happening over the last 3 to 5 years is a lot of work on how we integrate these networks and how we leverage the power of fully integrated networks, or as the case may be, in the case of cycling networks, having a network so that we can actually support people to shift out of their cars or to use cycling as an alternate transport mode for some of their trips. And we know the most significant thing that changes people's behaviour around cycling and even public transport is the ability to be able to use a dedicated network and safely use that network. So there has been a real priority on starting to be quite focused and systematic in the way that we deliver integrated networks for Auckland. I will reiterate again, the challenge of this is that the limited funding means we can only do a portion or some of these networks, and so there is a number of decades of work required for us to fully deliver on the vision of these plans that we're currently doing. Move to the next slide, please. So we have been actively working together. There are certainly opportunities for us to continue to grow our partnerships and to work much more closely together in the future. But we have been, ATAP is an example of multi-agencies working together to agree prioritised plan for transport in Auckland. AT and ourselves are working together on alliances and multiple projects. We have the Supporting Growth Alliance that's looked at key development and growth areas in Auckland. And so there has been a lot of active planning and work happening in partnership together. Another example actually would be the national ticketing system, where Auckland is part of a partnership across the country to develop an integrated national ticketing framework for New Zealand. We've also been deeply working together on asset management and resilience strategy, policy and response. You may not be aware that there is a National Resilience Plan out for consultation at the moment. We have worked with all councils to set up a standard asset management framework for New Zealand in the last 2 years, which will allow us to have much greater visibility and comparative data on the state of our assets in New Zealand than we've previously had. And Tamaki Makaurau has been deeply involved in supporting and providing input into those frameworks and documents, which are national documents, but obviously have a significant implication for Auckland, and Auckland will want to use those documents as it develops its future program planning and funding frameworks. We're also doing collaborative infrastructure delivery, and Northwestern interim bus improvements are an example of that. And we have multi-party groups set up and working together on the rapid transit networks, Waitemata, Second Crossing, Northwest Rapid Transport, Airport to Botany, and both Shane Ellison and myself were on the Auckland Light Rail Governance Board, with Mark Lambert now being involved in the group along with us that is involved in being advised around that project. So with some of the complexity in how these projects are now funded and set up, we do have multiple project governance structures, and have worked very hard actually to build integrated, representative and reflective governance structures that reflect the fact that these are Auckland Tamaki Makaurau projects. They need to be led and owned by Auckland, and we are here to support you in delivering on what is one of New Zealand's key assets, our largest city, our most dynamic and growing city, and the most important city in terms of our connection to the rest of the world. So I'll stop there and just let you ask any questions.
Thanks very much, Nicole, for that very comprehensive presentation. And as members will see, NZTA, Waka Kotahi is such an important player in our transport network. I'm really looking forward to sharing that relationship, and at some point sooner rather than later, once the current challenge is over, is actually getting out and doing some site visits to see some of these major projects and investments that are occurring. So I'll open it up to any questions that members may have now. And I just, before I do, I just make the point we've got a very large number of quite lengthy and significant and detailed presentations today, so I'd really appreciate if we could please keep our questions reasonably succinct, so we can move through what is quite a large number of substantial items today. So with that in mind, the questioners we've got now is Councillor Newman, Simpson, Darby and Lee and Ferry. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Rosie. Can I just, a couple of questions from me. I know that there has been conjecture about whether will it or won't it with the NZ up, but can I understand what is Waka Kotahi's professional opinion with respect to the completion of the full Mill Road corridor?
New Zealand Up projects are government-funded projects. It is the role of Waka Kotahi to deliver those on behalf of government, and we have no decision-making rights in relation to those projects. So I'm not in a position to offer you an opinion. I actually don't have a view on that. That will be a decision of government as to how they would like to invest in those projects in South Auckland.
With respect to the GPS, you've indicated the forthcoming GPS and set out what you would identify in the flagship requirement, which is reduced emissions reduction. How quickly is the organisation able to pivot in the event that there is a change in government? There's a different approach with respect to the GPS.
Yes, well, that's exactly what we've been setting ourselves up to do. These outcomes we're looking for as a nation: climate, safety, sustainable and resilient networks cannot be achieved in a 3-year election cycle. They need to be, we need to have sustainable programs of work that we can invest in and deliver over time with some certainty for our supply chain, but mostly to achieve the outcomes we want as a nation. If we don't have some continuity, we won't achieve those outcomes. So we have been setting ourselves up to be able to be very flexible in the program that we deliver within the plan. Should there be change in government, irrespective of the flavour of that government. In terms of our program, we have active plans across all modes, across all networks. We can quickly identify what each region and city sees as their strategic priorities within that plan, and can quickly pivot based on the government of the day's priorities in any of those networks now to deliver what they would like.
Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. Just finding the buttons there. Kia ora, Nicole. Hey, Nicole, at the outset, I just want to thank you and all your whole team for the response. Of course, right now in the Hawke's Bay, but previously Northland, across Auckland, I found myself having to travel back from Northland 10 days ago, and I think past 100 slips on your network. And your people were out there, in double quick time. Big challenges for you now. I really appreciate your time here today, because I know you've got other pressing matters. Just on that, it feels like the paradigm has changed, Nicole, particularly due to yesterday in the Hawke's Bay, more than us. And it feels like the funding sources and the spends are going to be, dramatically different. They're going to have to be different because you are facing probably billions just in the Hawke's Bay. Can you just give us a sense of now, because I think we need to be prepared for it changing. I know it's probably too early to call numbers, but can you just give us a sense of the enormity that you as the chief executive and your board are likely to be facing in delivering on promises and plans?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Look, the first thing to just acknowledge is we have actually been looking at this. We have been very focused on working with government on a funding review. We have been identifying for some time that there is a significant gap between the revenue that we have in the system and the need of that system in terms of sustaining the levels of service we currently have, but certainly to meet those large objectives we have as a nation and the customer service levels our communities expect into the future. So that gap prior to this event between what we know is likely in forecast revenue and what is already on the plan really in the next 10 years is in the order of $30 to $40 billion. Now you overlay these events and it's even more significant. And I think if you look at the work we've done on resilience, and we've done resilience plans for that's out for consultation at the moment, but just really simply, larger culverts, stronger bridges, bigger retaining walls, or in some cases relocating roads. Reinstatement will not solve those problems to the same level. So you will be talking about probably in the order at a minimum of 3 to 5 times what an existing reinstatement would cost. And in some cases, depending on the network, you might be 10 times that. And those numbers are just indicative, and it'll be dangerous to put those into the public domain in the sense of a media story because they're simply not quantified at the moment for this event. But I think it is worth everybody reflecting that the numbers are a lot more significant if we are we're really rebuilding our networks to be far more resilient, and that will cost money, a lot of money.
Good question.
Thanks, Noel. All the best in that area.
Councillor Simpson.
Thanks, Chair. Steve, Randy and Nicole, thank you and welcome. My question is for you, Nicole, and thank you for your presentation. Could you possibly give us an update on the MOT review, revenue review, because obviously this will shape the future investment right throughout the country, but specifically for Auckland as well. Have you got anything on that?
That review has been led by MOT and Treasury, so they'd be the right people to come and speak to the committee about it. I can tell you that the initial report back from that committee has happened from MOT and Treasury to ministers. So they would be the right group to come and talk to you about that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thank you very much. I just want to talk about your your challenging transport mission for Auckland, Tamaki Makaurau, which obviously is quite complex, quite complicated. You also mentioned the light rail project, or Light Rail Limited, which you're involved in. As I understand it now, the projected cost of that is 14.6 billion, and some Treasury, is it, that is saying that it could go up to 29 billion. But leaving that aside, one thing we know for sure is 60 million has already been spent, but not 1 centimetre of track laid. Can I ask you, the project is for Aucklanders. Has Waka Kotahi ever polled or surveyed Aucklanders in general about their views? And I'm not talking about controlled consultation groups or focus groups, but polling the general public to get their view on the priority of this project.
So again, I'm not the right party to talk about Auckland Light Rail. The government has set up a standalone entity. Tommy Parker is the chief executive of the Light Rail unit, and he is tasked by the government, Minister Wood, to deliver that project on behalf of New Zealand. My role and that of Shane Ellison was actually in the establishment unit phase before the entity was set up. So those questions about the cost and other things, you'd be best to direct to that unit. Your broader question about what are the transport preferences of Aucklanders, AT has done a lot of that work in that space. I don't know that there has been a general poll of the nature that you talk about, polling on transport options and choices. I can tell you that there has been a tremendous amount of community polling and input into the light rail project, but you'd have to direct your questions to Tommy as to exactly how those polls were conducted. And there is quite a large amount of community support.
You did mention it yourself and your involvement in the project. And look, my statement around costs were not questions. Thank you.
Okay, and just worth noting that Auckland Light Rail we will be getting along to present to the committee. Okay, I'm aware that Nicole has another appointment she has to get to very soon. So could we quickly finish off with Councillors Ferry and Hills, please?
Thank you. So my question is in relation to where Waka Kotahi has part-funded or fully funded projects, but they haven't yet been delivered by AT. So what measures are Waka Kotahi looking at for putting pressure on AT to deliver? What type of timeframes are we looking at with some of those projects? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. You'll be aware we sit on the AT board. I'm the representative on the AT board for Kotahi. So I'm quite across the projects that are being delivered and together, I guess, or funded at least in part by Waka Kotahi within the AT program of work. And I can tell you from having sat on the board, there is a lot of tension in that board around what's happening on those projects and the delivery timeframes. We also have our own board as Waka Kotahi that has to approve funding applications and will also have to review any escalation and cost on these projects, and they put a lot of scrutiny across additional cost and time frame delays, and there is certainly a lot of questions and testing that goes back into Auckland Transport, but actually into any council in New Zealand that has escalation in their cost. What we're seeing at the moment is that the delivery environment is extraordinarily challenging. We have huge escalation across all aspects actually of construction delivery. We have a hugely constrained labour market. We've had huge absences over the last year from COVID, and in your case you've had lockdowns through a large part of the last year. So actually the idea that these projects can just be set up and run with all of the challenges of getting supplies, getting people, and the escalation levels that we're seeing, I think is probably just to reflect back to the committee, probably an unrealistic expectation. What we are all desperately trying to do is move these projects as fast as possible. We know that delivery is an absolutely critical focus for the council, for the mayor, for ministers and for New Zealand. And there is a huge amount of work behind the scenes to dynamically move resources around to keep things moving with the constraints we're operating in.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair Watson. Thank you, Nicole, and once again, just thank you for your workers and contractors over the last 3 weeks in Auckland and North Island. Just phenomenal job and working alongside Auckland Transport as well. Thank you. I guess it's a comment kind of following on from Councillor Darby, sorry, a question. Do you feel you have enough direction or political input, or do you feel like you have the ability to pivot faster than you already were on both mitigating and adapting to climate? So, clearly everything's changed the last couple of years and even more the last 3 weeks. Are you able to be focusing climate on both emissions and adaptation on all of your projects?
So it's a really interesting question, because I would say when you go back to trade-offs, you're also asking us to maintain all our networks, keep them open, keep them operating. So I would say we can absolutely pivot, and we absolutely can do climate, and we can absolutely deliver climate projects. And we absolutely have the capability to do a lot more cycling, a lot more walking, a lot more mass transit. But you're also asking that we maintain our networks, that we continue to improve service and access on those networks, that we upgrade those networks, and there isn't enough money to do all of that. So the challenge is absolute trade-offs. Do you maintain your networks and upgrade them and make them resilient for the future? Or do you invest in walking, cycling and public transport choice? We need to do them both, but with insufficient money to do them all, we are in trade-offs. I think that's the real challenge for operating agencies who are being asked to do them all, but don't actually have sufficient resources, and I think the nation probably doesn't, for the level of investment that will be required to do them all. That's a bit about money. It's also just about capacity in the system. So I think that is a real challenge for the committee. It's a real challenge for all boards, actually, to consider in this space, because we are in trade-off choices.
That's a great answer, and the one I was hoping for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicole. And just very finally, our Mayor has a question he wants to ask.
Thanks, Nicole. Look forward to seeing you next week. A shortage of cash means more of a focus on value for money. Everything's a trade-off. We have perhaps sunk too much in elaborate motorways, whereas it's more of a spreading the marmite a bit further with some of the other ones. There's a history of Waka, Kotahi and government departments overestimating the budget benefits of projects and underestimating the costs. So I want to see that there's a hard-nosed approach to value for money, the sort of stuff that my background comes from. I'm sure you're going to be concentrating on that. That's how you're going to get your trade-offs.
I welcome that, Mayor, and I would also say that the Infocom and multiple other parties have looked at the factors that are most influential on effective program and project delivery, and they are consistency in the plan, consistency in the scope and outcomes that are wanted to be achieved, and sticking to that program of work at the start of a project or program of work. They are some of the biggest game changers in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. And then secondly, I completely agree with you, having a much heavier focus on efficiency and effectiveness and delivery. And I would just reflect back to you that if we could get 5 to 10 year certainty in funding for key things like median barrier delivery, like numbers of bridges we're going to replace, like the amount of improvement activity that would be needed on our networks, then we could absolutely get you percentages and significant percentages of efficiency within our supply chain and delivery models. So, and that we see that in Australia and other places that have been able to give that level of uncertainty. So I encourage this committee to really think about how we together can work on giving that level of certainty to some aspects of our funding requirements to enable us to give the efficiency that you would like.
Yeah, I'll join you next week in a few examples of how we can get more for the money.
Thank you very much, Nicole, for your very informative presentation today. Steve, is there anything else anyone else wants to add from your front?
No, I don't think so. We just really value the opportunity to talk with you today, so thank you.
Well, and thank you for coming along. And I just would say to the committee, this is the start of an ongoing process here, one in which hopefully we inform ourselves a lot more as to what Waka Kotahi is doing and how it relates to our transport network. So we really welcome your presence today, Nicole, and we look forward to seeing more of you and your team as the year progresses. So thank you very much. I have a recommendation that is moved by Councillor Fletcher, second by myself, to receive the update from Waka Kotahi. I now obliged to open up to debate, but I'm assuming most of the relevant content was covered in the questions. So is that a correct assumption? Does anyone want to make a comment?
Yes.
Make it quick, Councillor Walker.
Very quick, Mr. Chair. We heard a presentation this morning giving some specific examples of how to complete a network at dramatically less cost. I just wonder whether that sort of information consideration is being factored by Waka Kotahi. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's been moved. It's been seconded. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Thank you again, Nicole, and the Waka Kotahi members, Randir and Steve, and Mark Lambert. Thank you very much for your presence today. So we'll now move on